There are moments in life when nothing seems to collapse all at once. Instead, it breaks quietly, piece by piece. A plan fails. A relationship fades. To a version of yourself you once trusted slowly disappears. And one day you look around and realize you are living a life you never consciously chose. Just the result of decisions you avoided, truths you ignored, and fears you never faced. Most people respond by resisting this reality. They distract themselves, they deny it, or they wait for something outside of them to fix it. But life does not change because you wish it to. It changes the moment you decide to face it. And maybe the hardest part is not starting over, but having the courage to see clearly where you truly are right now. So if you never stop and face your reality, how can you ever begin to change it? The first step is not action. It is not planning. It is not even change. It is acceptance, not as surrender, but as clarity, because you cannot rebuild a life you refuse to see clearly. And this is where most people remain stuck, not because their situation is impossible, but because they continue to resist it. They soften the truth. They delay facing it. They tell themselves it is not that bad, or that things will somehow fix themselves with time. But time does not correct what you refuse to confront. It only deepens the gap between where you are and where you pretend to be. And this quiet denial slowly becomes a prison, one where nothing moves forward because nothing is fully acknowledged. Stoic philosophy does not ask you to like your reality. It does not demand that you feel good about what has happened. It only asks that you see it as it is, without distortion, without emotional exaggeration, and without escape. Because the moment you remove illusion, you regain direction, and that is where real control begins. When you sit with yourself and say, "This is my life right now. This is where my decisions have led me. This is what is working, and this is what is not." Something shifts. You stop reacting blindly and start observing consciously. And that awareness creates space. Space to think clearly. Space to choose differently. Apply space to act with intention instead of impulse. And it is important to understand that acceptance is not passive. It is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is the opposite. It is the act of taking responsibility without excuses, without blame, without the need to point outward. Because as long as you are blaming circumstances, people, or timing, you are giving away the only thing that can change your life: your agency, your ability to respond, your power to act. And once that power is externalized, you remain dependent on things you cannot control. But when you accept reality fully, even if it is uncomfortable, even if it exposes your mistakes, even if it forces you to admit that you ignored signs or made choices that led you here, you take that power back. You move from being a passive participant in your life to becoming an active one. And this shift is subtle but decisive, because from that point forward, your focus changes. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin to ask, "What can I do with this?" And that question is far more useful, far more practical, and far more aligned with growth. Because it places you back in motion. It moves you away from rumination and into response. And response is where transformation begins. Many people avoid acceptance because it is uncomfortable. It requires honesty, and honesty often reveals things we would rather not see. Wasted time, poor decisions, misplaced trust, patterns that repeat. But avoiding that discomfort does not protect you. It prolongs the situation. It keeps you looping through the same outcomes with different circumstances. And over time, that becomes far more painful than a moment of truth. So the Stoic approach is simple, not easy, but simple. Face what is in front of you. Name it clearly. Remove the stories you have built around it, and deal with it directly, because clarity is always more useful than comfort. And once you have clarity, you have a foundation, not a perfect one, not a stable one, but a real one. And that is enough to begin. Because rebuilding your life does not start when everything is fixed. It starts the moment you stop pretending. The moment you stand still long enough to see where you truly are, and decide that from this point forward, you will move with awareness instead of avoidance, with responsibility instead of excuse, and with intention instead of reaction. And that is why acceptance is not weakness. It is the first real act of strength, because you cannot change what you refuse to accept. The second step is letting go of the past, not by forgetting it, and not by pretending it never happened, but by refusing to carry it into every moment of your present. Because the truth is, most people are not held back by where they are. They are held back by what they continue to replay in their minds. They revisit old conversations. They relive mistakes. They imagine different outcomes. And they ask themselves the same questions again and again. What if I had chosen differently? What if I had stayed? What if I had left sooner? And while these questions feel important, they do not move your life forward. They only keep you emotionally tied to something that no longer exists. And this attachment becomes a weight, not always visible, but always present, shaping your decisions, your confidence, and your willingness to try again. Stoic philosophy approaches the past with a different perspective. It does not deny its impact, but it refuses to grant it control over the present, because what has already happened is outside your control, and anything outside your control should not be allowed to dominate your mind. Yet this is exactly what many people do. They give their energy to something that cannot be changed, and in doing so, they lose the ability to fully engage with what can be changed, which is their response, their next decision, their current direction. And it is important to understand that holding on to the past is not the same as learning from it. Learning requires clarity, but holding on is driven by emotion, especially guilt, regret, and resentment. And these emotions, when carried for too long, to begin to distort how you see yourself. You start to believe that your mistakes define you, that your failures are permanent, that your past is a reflection of who you are, rather than what you went through. But this is not truth. It is interpretation, and interpretation can be changed. A Stoic does not ask, how do I erase what happened? They ask, what does this teach me? And once the lesson is clear, there is no reason to keep the pain attached to it. Because pain without purpose becomes suffering, and suffering without awareness becomes a pattern. And that pattern keeps repeating until it is broken consciously. Sometimes the past is not only about your own actions, it is about what others did to you, the ways you were treated, the trust that was broken, the expectations that were not met. And these experiences can leave a deeper mark because they involve not only regret, but also resentment. And resentment is particularly dangerous because it feels justified. You feel that you have the right to hold on to it. That letting go means accepting what happened. But letting go is not agreement. It is release. It is the decision to stop allowing someone else's actions to occupy space in your mind. Because every moment you spend holding on to anger or pain is a moment you are not fully present in your own life. And that is a cost many people do not realize they are paying. The Stoic approach is not to suppress emotion, but to examine it, to understand it, and then to decide whether it serves you or not. And if it does not, it must be released. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Imagine carrying a heavy object every day without putting it down. At first you notice the weight, but over time you get used to it. You forget what it feels like to be free of it. And that is how many people live with their past. They normalize the burden, but the moment you decide to put it down, even partially, you feel the difference. Your mind becomes lighter, your focus sharper, your energy more available for the present. And that is where rebuilding begins. Not in trying to fix what is gone, but in freeing yourself from what no longer needs to be carried. And this requires a shift in how you speak to yourself. Instead of repeating, "I should have known better," you begin to say, "I understand better now." Instead of saying, "I ruined everything," you say, "I learned something valuable." And this is not about positive thinking. It is about accurate thinking. Because the past cannot be rewritten, but its meaning can be reinterpreted. And that reinterpretation changes how you move forward. So you do not forget. You do not erase. You simply choose not to carry unnecessary weight. You take the lesson, and you leave the rest behind. Because your past is a lesson, not a life sentence. The third step is to rebuild your mindset. Not through motivation, not through temporary bursts of confidence, but through discipline, because the way you think is not random. It is trained, and whether you realize it or not, your current mindset is the result of repeated thoughts you have accepted over time. And those thoughts have shaped your actions, your reactions, and ultimately your life. Most people try to change their situation without changing the patterns in their mind. And that is why they find themselves returning to the same place again and again. Different circumstances, same outcomes, because the internal structure has not changed. Stoic philosophy begins with a simple but demanding principle. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of them. And this distinction is critical, because if you believe every thought that appears in your mind, you will be controlled by impulses, fears, and old conditioning. But if you learn to observe your thoughts, question them, and choose which ones to act on, you begin to regain control. And this is where discipline becomes necessary. Not the discipline of forcing yourself to feel positive, but the discipline of refusing to accept every negative narrative your mind produces. Thoughts such as "I am not capable," "I always fail," "This is too difficult." These are not facts. They are automatic responses shaped by past experiences. And while they may feel true, they are not necessarily useful. And a Stoic does not ask, "Is this thought comfortable?" They ask, "Is this thought helpful? Does it lead me toward action, clarity, and strength? Or does it keep me passive, confused, and stuck?" And once you begin to apply this filter, something changes. You no longer react immediately. You pause. You create a small distance between the thought and your response. And in that space, you gain the ability to choose. Instead of saying, "I cannot do this," you say, "I do not yet know how to do this." Instead of saying, "I failed," you say, "This attempt did not succeed, but it showed me something I did not understand before." This is not optimism. It is precision. It is the deliberate correction of distorted thinking. And over time, these corrections begin to reshape your internal dialogue. But mindset is not only influenced by what happens inside your head, it is also shaped by what you expose yourself to. The conversations you have, the content you consume, the people you spend time with, all of these act as inputs that reinforce certain patterns of thinking. If you constantly surround yourself with negativity, distraction, and shallow stimulation, your mind will mirror that environment. It will become scattered, reactive, and weak. But if you intentionally choose inputs that challenge you, that require focus, that encourage growth, your thinking begins to align with that direction. And this is why a Stoic pays attention not only to their thoughts, but to the sources that feed those thoughts. Because discipline is not only about resisting impulses, it is about designing an environment where better thinking becomes easier. And it is important to understand that rebuilding your mindset is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. Some days, your mind will be clear. Other days, it will fall back into old patterns. And this is expected because change does not happen in a straight line. It happens through repetition, through consistent correction, through returning again and again to the standard you have chosen. And this repetition begins to form identity, because every time you challenge a negative thought, every time you act despite doubt, every time you choose clarity over confusion, you reinforce a new version of yourself, not the person who reacts automatically, but the person who responds deliberately. And over time, this becomes natural. Your default shifts. Your first reaction is no longer to withdraw or doubt, but to observe and act. And that is the real transformation. Not a sudden change, but a gradual reorganization of how you think, how you interpret, and how you respond. Because your life does not improve simply because your circumstances change. It improves because you become someone who thinks differently, decides differently, and acts with intention. And that is why rebuilding your mindset is not optional. It is the foundation, because without it, every external change will eventually collapse back into old patterns. But with it, even small actions begin to compound into meaningful progress. So you train your mind, not once, but every day, with awareness, with discipline, and with the understanding that the quality of your life will always reflect the quality of your thinking. The fourth step is to act, not in a dramatic or overwhelming way, but in a small and consistent way. Because the mistake most people make when trying to rebuild their life is believing that change must feel powerful in order to be real. They wait for motivation. They wait for clarity. They wait for the right moment. And when those feelings appear, they try to do everything at once. They set large goals, create intense plans, and expect immediate results. But this approach is unstable. It depends on emotion, and emotion is unreliable. It rises and falls without warning, and when it fades, so does the effort, leaving behind another cycle of starting and stopping, which slowly erodes confidence. Stoic philosophy does not rely on motivation. It relies on discipline, and discipline is not built through intensity. It is built through repetition, through small actions performed regardless of how you feel. And this is where real progress begins. Not when you feel ready, but when you act anyway, even if the action seems insignificant. Because rebuilding a life is not a single decision. It is a series of decisions made daily, often quietly, often without recognition. And these decisions accumulate over time, shaping your habits, your identity, and your direction. When everything in your life feels unstable, the last thing you need is more pressure, more expectations, more complexity. What you need is simplicity. One clear action, repeated consistently. It could be something as small as working on your goal for 20 minutes, reading a few pages, exercising briefly, or simply showing up when you would normally avoid it. These actions may seem too small to matter, but they serve a different purpose. They create movement. and movement breaks stagnation. Once you begin moving, even slowly, you are no longer stuck. And that shift alone is significant, because it changes how you see yourself. Instead of someone who is waiting, you become someone who is acting, and this builds a quiet form of confidence, not based on results, but based on evidence. Evidence that you can follow through, that you can maintain direction, that you are capable of consistency. And consistency is what transforms effort into progress. It is what turns action into habit, and habit into identity. A Stoic does not ask, "How much can I do today?" They ask, "What is the right thing to do? And can I do it again tomorrow?" Because sustainability matters more than intensity. A single strong effort does not change your life, but a repeated small effort does. And this requires patience, because results do not appear immediately. They develop beneath the surface, like something growing underground, invisible at first, easy to doubt, easy to abandon. And this is where most people stop, not because nothing is happening, but because they cannot see it yet. They expect visible change too quickly, and when it does not appear, they assume the process is not working. But the Stoic approach is different. It focuses on the process itself, not the outcome. You do the work because it is the correct action, not because it guarantees immediate reward. And over time, this mindset removes frustration. It removes the need for constant validation and replaces it with stability. You are no longer dependent on quick results to stay committed. You continue because you have chosen the path. And this creates momentum. Each small action reinforces the next. Each day builds on the previous one. And slowly, without dramatic shifts, your life begins to reorganize. What once felt difficult becomes normal. What once required effort becomes automatic. And this is how change becomes lasting. Not through sudden transformation, but through quiet persistence. And it is important to understand that consistency does not mean perfection. There will be days when you fall short, when your energy is low, when your focus is not as strong, but what matters is that you return. You continue. You do not allow a single break to become a pattern of stopping, because discipline is not about never failing. It is about not quitting. And over time, this reliability becomes part of who you are. You become someone who shows up, someone who follows through, someone who acts even when it is uncomfortable. And that identity is far more powerful than any short burst of motivation, because it is stable, it is grounded, and it carries you forward regardless of circumstance. So you start small. You remove the pressure to be perfect, and you commit to consistency, not because it feels exciting, but because it works. And in the end, it is not the intensity of your effort that rebuilds your life. It is the quiet discipline of showing up again and again, until the person you are becomes the person you needed. The fifth step is to remove what is holding you back. Because rebuilding your life is not only about what you add, it is about what you are willing to let go of. And this is where many people struggle. They look for new strategies, new habits, new goals, but they continue to carry the same patterns, the same distractions, and the same influences that created their current situation. And as a result, nothing truly changes, because progress cannot exist in an environment that constantly pulls you backward. Stoic philosophy approaches this with clarity. It teaches that anything which weakens your mind, drains your energy, or distracts you from what matters should be examined carefully, not emotionally, but rationally, because not everything in your life deserves to remain there, even if it feels familiar, even if it once served a purpose. There are three primary sources that tend to hold people back, and they often go unnoticed because they are part of daily life. The first is negative habits, the repeated behaviors that seem small but accumulate into significant consequences. Habits like procrastination, constant distraction, avoidance of responsibility, or overconsumption of things that provide temporary comfort but no lasting value. These habits do not destroy your life in a single moment. They do it slowly, quietly, by reducing your focus, your discipline, and your ability to act. And the danger is not only in the behavior itself, but in the identity it creates. Because every time you repeat a weak habit, you reinforce the idea that this is who you are. Someone who delays, someone who avoids, someone who lacks control. And over time, that belief becomes harder to challenge. The second source is the people around you. Not everyone in your environment is aligned with your growth. Some people operate from negativity, from fear, from limitation, and while they may not intend to hold you back, their perspective influences yours. Their words shape your thinking, and their expectations can quietly define your limits. A Stoic does not blame others for this influence, but they take responsibility for the environment they choose to remain in. They understand that proximity shapes perspective, and that if they continue to surround themselves with those who do not value growth, discipline, or clarity, they will eventually mirror that mindset. And this does not mean you must confront or reject people aggressively. Often it is enough to create distance, to reduce exposure, to spend more time in environments that support the direction you are trying to move toward. The third source is internal, and often the most difficult to address. It is negative thinking, the internal dialogue that repeats doubt, fear, and limitation. Thoughts that say, you are not ready, that you are not capable, that you will fail again. These thoughts may feel justified, especially if they are based on past experiences, but they are not always accurate. And more importantly, they are not useful, because they prevent action before it even begins. And this is where Stoic discipline becomes essential. You must learn to question these thoughts, to challenge their authority, and to decide whether they deserve your attention. Because not every thought should be followed, and not every belief should be maintained. Once you begin to identify these three areas, habits, people, and thoughts, you gain the ability to make deliberate changes. And this requires courage, because removing what is familiar is uncomfortable. Even when it is harmful, you may feel resistance, you may feel uncertainty, you may even feel a sense of loss, because letting go often creates space, and space can feel empty at first. But that emptiness is necessary. It is what allows something new to enter, something more aligned with who you are trying to become. A Stoic understands that growth is not only about building, it is about clearing, about removing what no longer serves a purpose, about simplifying what has become unnecessarily complex. And this process is ongoing. It is not a single decision, but a series of choices made daily to reduce what drains you and to protect what strengthens you. And as you begin to remove these influences, something changes. Your time becomes less fragmented. Your mind becomes less cluttered. Your energy becomes more focused. And with that clarity, your ability to act improves, because you are no longer working against yourself. You are no longer divided between intention and behavior. And this alignment creates momentum. It makes progress more natural, more sustainable, and less dependent on effort alone. So instead of asking, what more should I do? You begin to ask, what should I stop doing? What should I step away from? What is no longer worth my attention? And these questions lead to powerful answers, because every time you remove something that weakens you, you create space for something that strengthens you. And that is how rebuilding becomes possible, not by adding endlessly, but by refining intentionally, by choosing with awareness, and by understanding that you cannot reach a new level while holding on to what belongs to the old one. The sixth step is to take control of your time and your energy, because no matter what goals you set or what intentions you carry, your life will always reflect how you spend your days. Not occasionally, not when you feel inspired, but consistently, and this is where many people lose direction. Not because they lack ambition, but because they lack structure. They wake up without clarity. They move through the day, reacting to whatever demands their attention. Message, notification, other people's priorities. And by the end of the day, they feel busy but unchanged, occupied but not progressing. And over time, this pattern creates frustration, because effort is being spent but not invested. Stoic philosophy approaches this with a simple distinction. There are things within your control and things outside of it, and your time and energy belong entirely to the first category. Yet they are often treated as if they are disposable, given away to distractions, to unnecessary obligations, to habits that provide momentary relief but no lasting value. And when this happens repeatedly, the result is not only wasted time, but diminished capacity, because energy is not unlimited. It is influenced by everything you do, what you consume, how you rest, who you interact with, and how you direct your attention. If your energy is scattered, your actions will be inconsistent. And if your actions are inconsistent, your progress will be slow or non-existent. So, controlling your life begins with controlling where your time goes and how your energy is managed. This does not require extreme discipline. It requires awareness, the ability to observe how you are currently spending your time without judgment, and then to make deliberate adjustments. Instead of reacting to the day, you begin to define it. You identify what matters most, what actions move you forward, and you give those actions priority, even if they are small, even if they are uncomfortable, because priority is not determined by urgency. It is determined by value, and many of the things that feel urgent are not actually important. They only demand attention because they are immediate. And without awareness, immediacy becomes the default, pulling you away from what truly matters. A Stoic does not allow this to happen unconsciously. They decide in advance what deserves their focus, and they return to it repeatedly, regardless of distraction. And this creates a form of stability, because when your attention is directed intentionally, your efforts begin to align. Your actions support each other instead of competing, and your progress becomes more visible. But time alone is not enough, because even if you have the hours, without energy, those hours will not be used effectively, and energy must be protected, not in a rigid or obsessive way, but with understanding. Certain activities drain you: excessive scrolling, negative conversations, constant multitasking, lack of rest. These do not simply consume time. They reduce your ability to think clearly, to focus deeply, and to act with purpose, while other activities restore or build energy: focused work, meaningful learning, physical movement, proper rest. And the difference between the two is not always obvious in the moment, which is why reflection becomes important. Noticing how you feel after certain behaviors, noticing what leaves you clear and what leaves you scattered, and then adjusting accordingly. This is not about perfection. It is about refinement. making small changes that gradually improve how you function. And over time, these changes compound. Your days become more structured, your energy more stable, your actions more consistent. And with that consistency comes progress. Not dramatic, not immediate, but steady and reliable. And this is what rebuilding requires. Not bursts of effort, but sustained direction. It is also important to understand that controlling your time and energy is not about eliminating all distraction. That is unrealistic. It is about reducing what is unnecessary and protecting what is essential. It is about recognizing that every choice has a cost and choosing to pay attention only to what aligns with your goals. And this requires discipline, not the kind that forces you into constant productivity, but the kind that allows you to say no to what does not serve you and yes to what does, even when it is difficult, even when it requires effort. And as you continue to practice this, something changes. You begin to trust yourself more because your actions become predictable, your commitments become consistent, and your time begins to reflect your priorities, not your impulses. And this alignment creates a sense of control, not over everything, but over what matters. And that is enough. Because when you control how you spend your time, you shape your days. And when you shape your days, you shape your life. And when you protect your energy, you ensure that the time you have is used with intention. And together, these two elements form the structure that supports everything else. Without them, even the best plans remain unrealized. But with them, even small efforts become meaningful because they are directed, repeated, and sustained over time. The seventh step is to become the person your life requires. Because no matter how much you plan, no matter how many strategies you follow, your results will always be limited by who you are, not by what you want. And this is where many people misunderstand the process of change. They focus on outcomes, on goals, on what they hope to achieve, but they overlook the deeper requirement, which is transformation of identity. Because the life you want is not given to you based on desire. It is matched to the level of discipline, clarity, and resilience you embody. And if there is a gap between the two, that gap must be closed. Not by wishing, but by becoming. Stoic philosophy is clear on this point. You are responsible for your character, and your character shapes your actions, your reactions, and ultimately your reality. So, if you want a different life, you must ask a different question. Not what do I need to get, but who do I need to be? And this question shifts your focus inward. It moves you away from external conditions and toward internal development. Because external change without internal alignment is temporary. It does not last. It eventually collapses under pressure. But when your identity changes, your behavior follows naturally, and that behavior sustains the life you are building. Consider the qualities required for the life you want. If you seek success, you need discipline, the ability to act consistently without relying on motivation. If you seek peace, you need emotional control, the ability to remain steady regardless of external events. If you seek growth, you need humility, the willingness to learn, to adapt, and to accept correction. These are not traits you either have or do not have. They are traits you develop through repeated action, through choices made daily, often when it is inconvenient, often when it is uncomfortable. And this is why becoming is not a single decision. It is a process, one that unfolds over time, through consistency and awareness. And it is important to understand that this process will challenge you, It will require you to let go of familiar patterns, to step outside of comfort, to act in ways that do not feel natural at first. And this discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is changing. Because growth is rarely comfortable. It disrupts what is known and replaces it with something new. And during this transition, there will be moments of doubt, moments where the old version of you feels easier, more familiar, more appealing. But returning to that version will always lead to the same results. So the Stoic approach is to remain steady, to continue acting in alignment with the person you have chosen to become. Even when there is no immediate reward, even when progress feels slow, because identity is built through repetition. Every time you act with discipline, you reinforce discipline. Every time you control your response instead of reacting impulsively, you strengthen control. Every time you follow through on what you said you would do, you build trust in yourself. And over time, these actions accumulate. They reshape how you see yourself, and how you see yourself determines how you act. And this creates a cycle, but now it is a constructive one that supports growth instead of limiting it. And as this new identity becomes more stable, something shifts in your life. Challenges that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Decisions that once caused hesitation become clearer. And opportunities that once felt out of reach become accessible. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. And this is the fundamental principle. Your life reflects your level of development, not your level of desire. So instead of waiting for a better situation, you focus on becoming better equipped, stronger, more capable, more aware. And as you do, your environment begins to respond differently, because you are no longer reacting from weakness or confusion. You are acting from clarity and intention. And this changes the direction of your life in a way that is sustainable, because it is rooted in who you are, not in temporary circumstances. So you commit to the process of becoming, not for immediate results, but for long-term transformation. You accept that it will take time, that it will require effort, and that it will demand consistency, but you also understand that this is the only path that leads to lasting change. Because in the end, you do not receive the life you want. You receive the life you are prepared to handle. And when you become strong enough, disciplined enough, and clear enough, that life is no longer something you chase, it is something you are ready for.